Are you a pre-retiree or maybe you're already in retirement and you're just worried about making the wrong decision? Because if you make the wrong decision, it can mean a whole host of bad outcomes, like your family fighting after you're gone and possibly involved in a lawsuit. Or perhaps you're worried about paying more in taxes than you actually need to pay. Or maybe you're simply worried about running out of money, which survey after survey shows us is the number one concern of retirees. So today, we're going to go over retirement simplified. We're going to cut through the noise and focus on what really matters. Hello. My name is Jason Byance. I'm a former analyst and certified financial planner. And my job, my goal is to help make this complex world of retirement planning a little more simple and sensical. We had a lady come into our office a couple years ago. Her name was Charlene, and she just had a ton of concern and anxiety when it came to retirement planning. She was worried about her decisions around Medicare. She was worried about her investments, whether she was going to have enough to live on. And she was really, really worried about her sons because there was a lot of conflict between them. So, first thing I did was sit her down and we went over this whiteboard. Because if we can simplify things, you can start to hopefully lower that concern. We fear what we don't understand, we fear what we don't know. So, a summary can really, really help us. It's kind of like whenever you start a book, right? At the beginning of the book is the table of contents. So, let's start there and let's simplify retirement. So, let's jump right in with legacy planning. And the first thing that we're going to talk about is beneficiaries. So, beneficiaries are who you're going to leave things to after you're gone. And this is a really good homework item. You may want to write this down. I would go to all of your investment and insurance policies and find out your beneficiaries. So, if you have an investment account like an IRA or a brokerage account, or if you have a life insurance policy, you can call that custodian or carrier and ask them who are my primary or contingent beneficiaries. And you want to make sure that those are correct and up to date. A couple of years ago, we were sitting down with a couple and we did just that. And the gentleman's life insurance policy we called on, and we ended up finding out that his ex wife was still the primary beneficiary. You can imagine the tension inside of that room, all right? So, this will supersede all else. It doesn't actually matter what's in your will, it matters who is the beneficiary that's listed. And you can also do this with bank accounts. So go to your local bank and they call it something a little bit different. Most of them call it POD or payable on death. So you want to go and make sure that that CD, money market, savings account you have, whatever it may be, checking account, that you have a payable on death designation so that you can try to avoid probate. The other thing that we want to talk about in terms of legacy planning is your estate documents. So, estate planning can be very, very complicated, but today we want to keep things simple. So, I want to talk about the four main estate documents that most people need and most people have. All right. The first one is a last will and testament. Now, oftentimes there's a misconception about a last will and testament. People think that if you have a last will and testament in place, you'll avoid probate. Well, most of the time, that's not the case. A last will and testament is not for your family. It's not for your attorney that's settling the estate. Your last will and testament is for a judge because only a judge can retitle assets. A last will and testament is very, very important because it shares your desires, but you want to have your beneficiaries in place. And then sometimes you may need a trust, all right? And you're going to want to go talk to an attorney or a lawyer if a trust is right for you, especially if you hold real estate. The next document that you're going to want to look into is a living will. This is where you share your desires of if you want to be on life support and all those types of things. It takes those really, really difficult decisions off of your loved ones, all right? So those two documents are really toward the end or after you're gone. And then we've got two other documents, and that's a healthcare power of attorney and a financial power of attorney. A healthcare power of attorney lets whoever you designate talk to doctors, talk to insurance companies, request second opinions. It's very, very important in the case that you're incapacitated. And the other one is a financial power of attorney. And you want to have that in place so that you designate somebody to have the responsibility to act on your behalf, to transact things, again, if you were, say, in a coma or whatever it may be. So these are two of the major things that you want to focus on when we're talking about estate planning, but it's not everything. There's a lot that has to do with estate planning that's not just dollars and cents. And so I want to invite you to click the link below, and we would love to send you a free copy of my brother Justin's book, The Great Inheritance: 7 Steps to Leaving Behind More Than Your Money. Because there's a lot that you want to pass on to the next generation. You know, your family history, your life experiences, your life lessons. Perhaps there's some reconciliation and repairing of some family bonds that need to happen. And this book gives 7 simple steps to doing just that. So click the link below, and we'd love to send you a free copy of that book. So, next thing we're going to cover is healthcare planning. And healthcare planning is very, very important because this can often be one of the most expensive things in retirement. So, the first thing that we're going to cover is Medicare. You know, when people are talking about Medicare, they often get a little overwhelmed because it's a jungle out there. Should you go Medicare Advantage? Should you go Medicare Supplement? What type of prescription drug plan should you have? And then every roughly mid October, they have the annual enrollment period, and it goes through about mid December so that if you want to make a decision, if you want to make a change, you can do that. So we want to make sure that we have the right plan in place in terms of Medicare because otherwise we could get a lot of bills that we didn't expect. The next thing that we want to have a plan for is long term care. Long term care is having a plan to help care for you or a loved one if, in fact, you get to that point where you can't complete two of the six activities of daily living. And what are some examples of activities of daily living? Well, that would be things like dressing, eating, toileting, showering. So if you can't perform two out of six of those activities of daily living, you may qualify for long term care. And back in the day, older long term care policies, there used to be some pretty good ones out there. But nowadays, most of them, they will not guarantee their premiums. So every year, you get a letter in the mail. Do you want your premiums to go up or do you want your benefits to go down? You choose. However, if you have an old life insurance policy laying around, maybe it's in the back of your filing cabinet, sometimes you can exchange that for a new policy, which allows you to use your death benefit for your care while you're still living. So there's a lot of important strategies that we want to consider when it comes to long term care. Next, we have tax planning. And the first thing that we want to cover in tax planning is the three tax rules. Okay. What are the three tax rules? The three tax rules are number one, know your tax buckets. All right. So you have different types of investments. You may have an IRA, you may have a joint account with your wife, you may have a Roth. You want to know which tax bucket do all of my investments fall in. Then you want to know what are the tax rates? That's rule number two. Know the tax rates because each tax bucket has its own tax rate. And there's three tax buckets: the taxable bucket, the tax deferred bucket, and the tax free bucket. Each one has its different tax rate. And then rule number three is know your tax triggers. Because whenever we're talking about planning for retirement, whenever we're talking about pulling money out of each of those tax buckets, it's triggering taxes and it can also cause additional taxes on other types of income that we have. It's very, very important is to understand the three tax rules. And then the other big, big item that we want to know in terms of tax planning is tax strategies. And what do I mean by tax strategies? We want to put plans in place that help you and your family keep more money in your pocket versus sending it to the IRS. And so we need to have unique and custom tax strategies for you and your family. Is a Roth conversion appropriate for you? Or do you have a charitable heart? Maybe a qualified charitable distribution is important. Or maybe do you have a lot of stock that you've held for a very long time and there's a lot of gains in that? Well, then we may want to talk about tax gain harvesting, or if we have some losses in our portfolio in the middle of the year, we want to talk about tax loss harvesting. So there's a lot of tax strategies out there, but we need to first understand the three tax rules because then we can start to say, okay, this strategy over here, or maybe that strategy over there, is really going to be beneficial to you and your family. Next is investment planning. And there's actually three things that we want to cover here. And the first one is reduce fees. Unfortunately, financial services is known for having a lot of hidden fees and a lot of extra fees that you don't need to be paying. Like, for instance, do you own any mutual funds in any of your accounts? Well, if you own a retail mutual fund, those are Class A, Class B, or Class C shares, you may end up paying additional fees that you don't need to be paying. Or perhaps maybe you own a variable annuity, and these are notorious for having a ton of unknown or kind of hidden fees. And those fees really start to eat away at your principal and can really be kind of a big determinant of how long your money lasts. The next thing we want to be aware of is to align risk. What do I mean when I say align risk? Well, typically, whenever you take a risk questionnaire, it gives you a name. You're a conservative, you're a moderate, you're a moderately aggressive, whatever it may be. You see, those are just too broad, okay? We want something that's quantifiable. We want something that is precise. We want a risk number. So instead of saying you're a moderate, we want to say you're a risk number of 43. And then we want to know, is your portfolio roughly the same? Because investing is all about experience. And if there's storms on Wall Street, if there's volatility out there and the market is going down, and you're in a portfolio that's not aligned with your risk, you're going to have a really bad experience. And that's typically when we can make bad decisions. So we want to align our risk. We want our risk tolerance to be in line with our portfolio. And then the third one is diversify with a capital D. And why do I say diversify with a capital D? It's because this. Kind of the old school way of thinking was diversification is stocks and bonds. Because back in the day, 30, 40 years ago, it was actually good enough most of the time. Because whenever stocks were going down, bonds were going up, and vice versa. So they kind of worked in tandem with one another. But after the financial crisis of 2008, after the COVID pandemic of 2020, and after the inflation crisis of 2022, what we started to realize is stocks and bonds started to act alike. They started to go down at the same time. We really saw this during the financial crisis, 2020 and 2022. And what that ended up doing was causing us to really take a look at what is true diversification. What's diversification with a capital D? Well, what we want to also include in our portfolio are investments that don't have any risk, investments where we've transferred the risk to someone else. So, what do I mean by that? Well, it may be Treasury inflation protected securities or TIPS. That's where we've transferred the risk to the federal government. Or maybe we're talking about some type of insurance product. That's where we've transferred the risk to the insurance company. Or maybe we're talking about CDs or money markets or savings accounts. That's where we've transferred the risk to the bank. And these are very, very important because if we have money inside of investments that we can't lose, well, then we don't have to worry about locking in losses whenever the market is down. And then lastly, we have income planning. And the first thing that we want to talk about when it comes to income planning is stress test. What do I mean by stress test? Well, have you ever gone to your cardiologist and they said, hey, you need a stress test? And you go into the gym and they put you on a treadmill and then they start raising that incline to really start making your heart work so they can analyze if your heart can take the stress. Well, once we design an income plan, we want to do the same thing. We want to stress test our income plan for all kinds of scenarios. We want to stress test our income plan if the market goes down. We want to stress test it when inflation goes up or when we have big healthcare expenses or other life events. So then, when we stress test our income plan, we can have more confidence that our income is actually going to last as long as we do. And then lastly is spousal continuation. So, what do I mean by spousal continuation? Well, if you're married, statistically speaking, you're not going to pass away on the same day. So, if you're the husband, you are concerned. I would imagine you're very concerned about if you pass away, you want to make sure that your wife is going to be okay. And then the same for your wife. She predeceases you. I'm sure she's very concerned that you're going to be okay. Because here's the thing, we know after one of you passes away, you're going to lose one of your Social Security benefits. Not to mention, while you're married, you get to file your income taxes at married filing jointly rates. But after one of you is gone, the surviving spouse has to file at single filer rates, which are higher tax rates. So we have to send more to the IRS. So, a spousal continuation plan is making sure if one of the spouses predeceases the other, that surviving spouse is going to be okay. All right. So, I hope that this simplifies retirement a little bit. Okay. I hope that it was a decent summary, kind of a table of contents of whenever you're approaching retirement planning. And, I think the area that I get the most questions on is right here, tax planning. Because every person that I've ever ran into wants to pay the least amount in taxes. And that's why we made a video called The Three Tax Rules. So I invite you to click here to watch that video so you can help put a plan in place to keep a little bit more money in your pocket versus sending it to the IRS.